when a group of fake Oak Ridge HOA enforcers showed up at my door, claiming I was violating community regulations. I knew something was wrong. Their cheap plastic badges and smug attitudes screamed trouble. They tried to arrest me in my own backyard. The problem? I'm the actual county sheriff, and these fools were about to learn the hard way that they had picked the wrong target. I had always suspected that the Oak Ridge HOA was run by a bunch of control freaks with too much free time and not enough real responsibilities. They were self-appointed neighborhood sheriffs, believing they had the right to be judge, jury, and executioner for anyone who dared to defy their ridiculous rules. They had harassed me before, about the height of my fence, the shade of my front door, and even the way I parked my truck. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that morning. I was enjoying my coffee, savoring the quiet, when I caught movement outside in the reflection of my window. I turned slightly and saw 4 figures standing on my sidewalk. They all wore matching polo shirts, dark sunglasses, an air of authority that felt like it had been purchased at a discount store. One held a notebook, another had a toy radio strapped around his waist, and leading the pack was a woman with cropped, dyed hair, arms crossed, lips pursed, an expression like she had just licked a battery. Paula Benson. She was the self-proclaimed president of Oak Ridge HOA, acting as if she commanded an army instead of a neighborhood watch. Taking a deep breath, I set down my coffee, walked to the door, and barely had it open before she started talking, her voice dripping with authority. "You are in serious violation of HOA regulations, and we are here to take action." I narrowed my eyes, waiting for the punchline. Was this some elaborate prank? But before I could respond, she shoved a laminated paper in my face. "You are under investigation for multiple infractions, including unauthorized alterations to your garage, the presence of an unregistered vehicle on your property," and she paused dramatically, as if she were about to accuse me of a federal crime, inappropriate behavior towards community members. I almost laughed. My garage had been the same color since I bought the house. The unregistered vehicle was my legally owned and properly licensed truck, parked in my own driveway. And inappropriate behavior? In other words, I refused to attend their dull, pointless HOA meetings. That's when the absurdity escalated. "Since you have failed to comply with multiple warnings," Paula continued, puffing up like she was about to receive an award, "the HOA is exercising its right to civil custody. We are hereby detaining you until the matter is resolved." I blinked, trying to process the insanity. "You want to arrest me?" I asked slowly. Paula's grin widened. "Yes." Her henchmen stood behind her, nodding like a bunch of brainwashed cultists. I exhaled sharply, resisting the urge to burst out laughing. These people actually thought they had the power to detain someone. Little did they know, I was the real law in this town, and they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. "Oak Ridge HOA has full authority over this neighborhood," Paula Benson declared, her voice brimming with self-importance. The 3 goons standing behind her nodded in perfect sync, like a choir of well-trained parrots. That was the moment I realized just how deep the insanity ran. They really thought they had the power to arrest someone. Little did they know I wasn't just some ordinary homeowner. I was the county sheriff, not a mall security guard, not a volunteer neighborhood patrolman, a real officer, with a real badge, a real gun, and a real understanding of the law. Unlike these morons playing cops and robbers, I kept my cool, deciding to play along for a moment. "Interesting," I mused, rubbing my chin as if considering their ridiculous claims. "And how exactly do you plan on arresting me?" Paula turned to one of her henchmen, a sweaty, beer-bellied man crammed into a polo shirt 2 sizes too small. With a self-important smirk, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of plastic handcuffs. "Plastic?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "We have our methods," he said, trying to sound tough. That's when I knew the circus had officially set up shop on my doorstep. I sighed, took a deliberate step back, and in one smooth motion, pulled my wallet from my pocket, flipping it open to reveal my official sheriff's badge. Paula's smirk vanished faster than a Black Friday discount. "Good to know you think you can make arrests," I said, my voice turning sharp. "Because right now, you're the ones committing multiple crimes, including impersonating a law enforcement officer and attempted kidnapping. Silence. Paula's eyes widened in horror. Her lackeys exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they finally understood they had picked the wrong person. "What are you implying?" Paula stammered, her voice suddenly lacking the confidence it had just moments before. I folded my arms across my chest. "I'm implying that unless you get off my property in the next 5 seconds, I will arrest you, for real." The silence stretched. A bead of sweat trickled down the beer-bellied man's forehead. Paula's grip on the laminated official document trembled slightly. Then, like rats abandoning a sinking ship, the group scurried backward, muttering half-baked excuses as they retreated down the street. "It's not over yet," Paula shouted, spinning on her heel before disappearing with her pathetic crew. I stood there, watching them go, feeling a strange mixture of amusement and disbelief. What the hell had just happened? But deep down I knew this wasn't over. If I had thought that absurd arrest attempt was the end of it, I was sorely mistaken. Paula wasn't the type to give up easily. And I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. The next morning, I went outside to take out the trash, only to realize my garbage cans were gone. Not just tipped over. Not just moved. Completely gone. No sign of them on the sidewalk, in the alley, or even on the side of my house. And when I glanced across the street, I spotted Paula standing in her yard, arms crossed, smirking at me like a cat who had just swallowed a canary. That's when I knew. This war was just getting started. I looked around and, of course, I saw Paula Benson standing on the other side of the street, her arms crossed like she was some sort of queen ruling over the neighborhood. When our eyes met, she flashed a satisfied little smirk, before turning on her heels and striding back inside her house. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to ignore her. But when I reached my mailbox, I found an envelope with the Oak Ridge HOA stamp plastered on the front. I sighed. This was going to be some serious nonsense. Tearing it open, I scanned the letter. And no surprise, it was exactly what I expected. A list of so-called penalties for my continued non-compliance with community standards. Among the most absurd rules, I was forbidden from using waste disposal services. I could no longer park my truck in my garage. I was ordered to attend a mandatory HOA disciplinary meeting to discuss my inappropriate behavior. I exhaled sharply, then tore the letter in half right there, letting the pieces drift to the ground. If Paula thought she could intimidate me, she was dead wrong. But of course, she had other tricks up her sleeve. That afternoon, I ran a few errands. When I got home, something immediately felt off. Right in the middle of my driveway sat a bright orange traffic cone. Next to it, a wooden stake held up a laminated notice, which had been stuck into the ground like some sort of official proclamation. It read, "By order of Oak Ridge HOA, this garage is closed until further notice." I stood there for a moment, staring at it in disbelief. Who in their right mind thinks they can ban someone from using their own garage? With zero hesitation, I walked over, ripped the notice down, and tossed the cone onto the sidewalk. Across the street, 2 of Paula's cronies were watching me. One was furiously scribbling notes in a ridiculously oversized notebook. Maybe something like, "Homeowner removed official HOA cone. Violation recorded." Like they were real investigators and not 2 overgrown toddlers playing neighborhood hall monitor. Not even 2 minutes passed before Paula stormed out of her house, her face already flushed red with fury. "You can't remove that," she barked. I turned to her, still holding the cone, as if it were a murder weapon. "Oh, can't I?" I said, tilting my head. "In my own driveway?" Paula jabbed her finger at the laminated paper, her anger boiling over. "This is an official HOA sanction. You can't just ignore community rules." I exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to laugh. "Paula," I said, voice calm but firm, "you have no authority to close my garage. In fact, you don't have authority over anything except maybe how much you annoy me." Her eyes widened with indignation, but before she could open her mouth, I turned, walked inside, and slammed the door shut. But the story wasn't over. The next day, while I was at the county sheriff's office, my phone rang. The voice on the other end sounded tense. "Dude," said John Hayes, one of the only sane neighbors in this place. "The police are at your house." I froze. "What?" "2 squad cars. They said they got a tip-off about a man with a gun on your property." That's when it clicked. Paula had escalated. She had called the police, fabricating a report to get me in trouble. I grabbed my keys and drove home at breakneck speed. When I arrived, 2 officers were talking to Paula, who was in full performance mode, her hands gesturing wildly, her expression one of deep concern for the safety of the neighborhood. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her. Paula was playing her best victim act. Her posture, her voice, everything about her screamed concerned citizen, just looking out for the community. If I hadn't known she was a snake, I might have actually believed her. I stepped out of my car, and immediately both officers recognized me. I knew them, honest, good guys, and judging by the looks on their faces, they already knew this was a complete waste of time. "Oops, boss," one of them muttered awkwardly. "We got a report of suspicious activity involving a man with a gun at this residence." I turned my gaze straight at Paula. "Let me guess," I said. "The report came from this lady right here, huh?" Paula's face barely flickered, but she clutched her chest in mock offense. "I only reported what I heard," she said, her voice as sweet as artificial sugar. "Some people saw suspicious movement and got worried." The officers exchanged glances, already tired of this nonsense. One of them sighed, rubbing his forehead before turning back to me. "Well," he said, "since there's no real threat, we'll just register this as a prank call." Then he shifted his gaze to Paula. "Miss Benson, just so you know, making false police reports can get you into a lot of trouble." For the first time, I saw genuine nervousness on Paula's face. She opened her mouth, probably to protest, but thought better of it, clamping her lips shut and crossing her arms instead. The officers nodded to me before leaving, their patience completely drained. I stood there watching Paula as she watched me. For the first time, she seemed to understand that she was playing with fire. But I knew her type. She wasn't done. She was just gearing up for something worse, and I was waiting to see just how far she would go before she destroyed herself completely. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside. Still groggy, I stumbled to the window and pulled back the blinds. My heart nearly skipped a beat. A large utility truck was parked in front of my house. Several uniformed workers were stepping out, carrying shovels, excavators, and a mess of orange cones. They looked ready to dig up my entire yard. For a brief second, I thought, maybe they have the wrong address. But then, across the street, I spotted Paula Benson, arms crossed, standing on her porch with that same smug smile, like she had just pulled the first thread and was waiting for my entire world to unravel. I grabbed a jacket and stormed downstairs, barely taking time to lace up my boots. When I reached the front door, one of the workers, a stocky man holding a clipboard, turned to me. "Morning, sir," he greeted. "We're here to start the underground pipe repairs." I blinked. "What repairs?" The man glanced at his clipboard. "We received a formal request from the Oak Ridge Residents Association about a possible water main issue on this property." I clenched my jaw. Of course, Paula had escalated from fake arrests and false police reports to full-on property destruction. This time, she had gone too far. "A water leak on this property?" I repeated, crossing my arms. I glanced over at Paula Benson, who was suddenly very interested in a tree across the street. "Let me guess," I said, eyes narrowing. "The work order was signed by a certain Paula Benson?" The worker, a burly man with a clipboard, flipped through his stack of papers and nodded. "Yes, sir. The request came directly from Paula Benson, president of the Oak Ridge HOA. I exhaled, my patience hanging by a thread. This woman had actually ordered my entire yard to be dug up for a leak that didn't even exist. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the urge to tell everyone to pack up and get lost. "Look, buddy," I said, keeping my voice even. "There is no leak here. Neither you nor the HOA have the authority to touch anything on my property. So I suggest you and your crew pack up your tools and leave." The worker hesitated, glancing at his team as if hoping for some confirmation. "Well, sir, the thing is we're already here." "And now," I said, "you're leaving." He opened his mouth to argue, but then I calmly pulled out my sheriff's badge and flashed it in his face. His entire demeanor changed instantly. Eyes widening, he swallowed hard and turned to his crew. "All right, guys, let's call it a day." The workers immediately began packing up, eager to avoid getting involved in whatever mess was unfolding. Across the street, Paula Benson saw everything, and she was livid. She stormed toward me, her face red with fury. "You can't do this," she shrieked. I raised an eyebrow. "Do what? Stop you from destroying my yard for no reason?" She clenched her fists. "The HOA has authority over this neighborhood's infrastructure." "And I countered, stepping closer, "have the authority to arrest you for trespassing and fraud." For the first time, Paula looked speechless. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish out of water. But just as quickly she recovered. "You're disrespecting the community," she spat. "That's not how a good neighbor behaves." I took another step forward, lowering my voice just enough to watch the color drain from her face. "And you're meddling where you shouldn't be," I said. Paula didn't reply. Instead, she threw her hands in the air, huffed dramatically, and stomped back into her house like a tantruming child. But I knew she wasn't done. She was already plotting her next move. And I found out what it was the following week. A letter arrived from the HOA Disciplinary Committee, informing me that my house was now under formal review. Apparently, my behavior was harming the well-being of the community. In other words, they were trying to evict me. I laughed, a loud, full-bodied laugh. The HOA had zero power to do that. They didn't own my house. They had no control over my mortgage. But clearly, Paula thought they did. And to make matters worse, some neighbors were starting to turn against me. Thanks to the smear campaign she was running, almost overnight, I had become public enemy number 1 in Oak Ridge, and I had a feeling this war was just beginning. I had officially become the neighborhood's biggest problem. The rebel, the outcast, the one who refused to bow to the sacred order of the Oak Ridge HOA. It got so ridiculous that one afternoon, while I was picking up groceries, a neighbor who had barely spoken to me before approached. She glanced around nervously before leaning in, as if passing along classified intelligence. "You know," she whispered, "some people think you don't really fit in here. Maybe you should consider moving?" I flashed her a fake smile. "Some people," I replied, "should worry more about their own lives." She blushed and quickly scurried away. The meeting of shame. The HOA's disciplinary hearing was set for Friday evening. I went purely for entertainment. The community room was packed, the chairs lined up as if this were some kind of trial, and at the front, of course, was Paula Benson. She sat behind a table stacked high with papers, clearly preparing to publicly execute me. She cleared her throat and began speaking, her tone sickeningly, sweet and condescending like a kindergarten teacher scolding a child. "We are gathered here to discuss the highly problematic behavior of a resident who refuses to cooperate with the community." I rolled my eyes. "Cut the nonsense, Paula. You want me gone, don't you?" She tried to maintain her composure, but the truth was obvious. "Well," she said, "considering the number of offenses you've accumulated." I leaned forward. "Offenses?" I challenged. "Like what? False arrest? Fake police reports? Digging up my yard for a non-existent leak?" Her face flushed red, but she tried to push forward. "The point is," I raised my hand, cutting her off. "No, Paula, the point is, the HOA has no power to kick anyone out of this neighborhood. This isn't a gated community. You're not the sheriff in this meeting. It means nothing." Silence. A few neighbors glanced at each other, as if realizing it for the first time. Paula opened her mouth, then shut it again. She tried to laugh it off, but it was clear she had lost. "This is absurd," she spat. "You don't belong here." I crossed my arms. "Yeah? Well, I think I'm going to keep not belonging here because I'm not going anywhere." Her face burned with rage, but she knew she had no power left. Except Paula wasn't the type to accept losing, and I knew she had one last dirty trick left. I had seen her try to arrest me, dig up my yard, file false reports, and turn the neighborhood against me. Every time I thought she had reached peak insanity, she found a way to outdo herself. And after the humiliation she had suffered at the meeting, I knew she was going to come back swinging. This time she wasn't going to rely on letters, orange cones, or fake complaints. This time she played dirty for real. The final move. The week after the meeting, I was yanked from sleep by the shrill sound of sirens outside my house. Still groggy, I stumbled to the window, my stomach dropping at what I saw. 2 county enforcement vehicles had pulled up outside. Paula had gone nuclear. 2 county enforcement vehicles were parked outside my house, and across the street, standing with that same smug expression, was Paula Benson. She pretended to be just observing the scene, acting as though she had no involvement. But I knew better. Paula had called in the big guns. I went downstairs, opening the door before the inspectors even had a chance to knock. The first was a middle-aged man with a notebook in hand, his face set in an expression of forced professionalism. "Sir," he began, "we've received a formal complaint about multiple structural irregularities on this property. We'll need to conduct a full inspection." I raised an eyebrow. "Irregularities?" He cleared his throat and nodded. "Yes, according to the report, this residence has unauthorized construction, irregular plumbing, and a possible pest infestation." I nearly laughed. Paula wasn't just playing games to annoy me anymore. She was trying to get my house condemned. Leaning against the doorframe, I folded my arms. "And who exactly filed this complaint?" The inspector hesitated before sighing. "Well, the HOA officially submitted it." Of course it was the HOA. And of course Paula was behind it. I let out a slow breath before stepping back and gesturing inside. "All right, let's get this over with," I said. The inspector blinked in surprise. He probably expected me to protest, to argue, maybe even to slam the door in his face. But I wasn't worried. Unlike Paula, I wasn't doing anything illegal. My house was completely up to code. For almost 2 hours, they inspected everything. They measured walls, checked pipes, opened cupboards, and took photos. Meanwhile, Paula and a few of her cronies stood outside, eagerly waiting for bad news. When the inspectors were finally done, one of them, a younger guy, walked over. "Sir," he said, "we completed the inspection, and we found none of the violations listed in the complaint. Your property fully complies with all county regulations." I barely held back my laughter. "Dumu," I said, smirking. "You're telling me that the complaint was completely false?" The inspector scratched his head, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, technically, yes." I crossed my arms. "Good, because I'll be filing a formal complaint against the HOA for harassment and misuse of public resources." For the first time, Paula looked nervous. She marched toward me before the inspectors even had a chance to leave. "You're overreacting," she snapped. I rolled my eyes. "A safety protocol, huh? Strange, because the inspectors just told me my house is perfectly fine. So either you lied or you're just terrible at inspecting things." Her jaw clenched. She turned to the inspectors, expecting backup, but they both just shrugged, clearly done with this nonsense. She tried to argue, but I was already dialing the county office to file my complaint, and that's when she finally realized she had just dug her own grave. Paula finally backed down. "This isn't over yet," she growled before stomping off. Unfortunately for her, it was over. Over the next few days, everything unraveled. The formal complaint I had filed against the HOA was taken very seriously. Turns out, this wasn't the first time the county had received reports of their bullying tactics. Investigators started digging, and soon the truth began to surface. Paula had been illegally fining residents, without justification, just to fund extravagant parties for herself and a select group of HOA members. She had also hired shady contractors to do maintenance in common areas, and a portion of that money had somehow disappeared into thin air. But the real bombshell? Paula wasn't even supposed to be HOA president. The rules clearly stated that an election had to be held annually, but Paula had simply never organized one. She had kept herself in power for years, assuming no one would ever challenge her. Until now, a special meeting was called to determine the future of the HOA. Paula showed up, still trying to defend herself, but the situation was beyond saving. The same neighbors who had once followed her blindly were now furious, realizing they had been used. One by one, people turned against her. The final blow came when a county auditor was brought in to examine the HOA's financial records. The results: more than $30,000 was missing. That was all it took. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Paula from office immediately. She lashed out, threatened to sue everyone, even tried to shift the blame. But no one was listening anymore. And then someone called the police. Paula tried to sneak out, but 2 officers blocked her path. Her eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape, but there was none. The real handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then a voice called out, "Well done, Paula." Laughter erupted as she was escorted out, her reign of terror officially over. With her gone, the HOA underwent a massive overhaul. Unfair fines were canceled. Rules were loosened. And most importantly, no one would ever be allowed to have absolute power over the community again. The funniest thing? A few weeks later, I found out that Paula had tried to appeal in court, but failed miserably. She was forced to sell her house and move out of town. Word is she relocated somewhere new, probably planning to restart her little empire of control in another neighborhood. But here, peace had finally returned. And honestly, I've never been happier to see a for sale sign on that street.